When the judge called my name, my father wouldn't even look at me. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his tie, the same navy one he used to wear when he took me to school, back when he was still proud of me. But now, he stood across the courtroom as my opponent, not my parent. The air was heavy with the quiet hum of whispers, papers shuffling, and that sterile courtroom smell, a mix of polished wood, cold air conditioning. I could feel every eye on me, but my gaze stayed fixed on the man who had once taught me how to ride a bike, how to tie a tie, and how to stand tall no matter who's watching. Except now. He wanted to take everything I had worked for. When the judge asked, "Mr. Hayes, are you ready to proceed?" My voice didn't tremble. "Yes, Your Honor," I said, but inside I was breaking apart. Because this wasn't just about money, this was about betrayal, the kind that doesn't come from strangers, but from the people who are supposed to protect you from the world. The kind of betrayal that rewrites your childhood, memories, one courtroom minute at a time. Before all this, before the lawsuits, before the cold stares, my life was simple, maybe even peaceful. I owned a small but growing logistics company in Seattle. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I started it after years of saving, working night shifts, delivering packages, and driving cross-country trucks when I was just 20. I'd built something from nothing, and for a long time that nothing had been my life. See, my dad, Richard Hayes, was a man everyone respected. He was the kind of father who filled every room he entered, tall, deep-voiced, and confident. He ran a construction business back in Ohio and made sure everyone knew he'd earned every dime. I used to admire that. Growing up, I'd watch him flip through invoices at the kitchen table, a cigarette burning low between his fingers, muttering about deals and deadlines. My mom would bring him coffee in that chipped blue mug he refused to throw away. "Your father works hard, Ben," she used to say. "That's how men take care of their families." I believed that until I was old enough to see the cracks. He worked hard, yes, but he also gambled. Not in casinos. No, that would have been too easy to spot. He gambled on bad projects, bad partners, and worse habits. He'd pour everything into a deal that looked golden from the outside but was hollow on the inside. By the time I was 16, the arguments between my parents had become nightly background noise. Money, always money. So when I turned 18, I left, packed my things in an old Ford pickup and drove west. I told myself I'd never depend on anyone again, not even him. It took me 12 years to build my life back up. By 30, I had 40 employees, a rented warehouse, 3 delivery trucks with my company logo on the side, and most importantly, a peace I'd earned through every sleepless night. Dad and I hadn't spoken much in those years. Maybe a call on Christmas, maybe a text on birthdays. But when Mom passed away unexpectedly from a stroke, something in me softened. I remember standing beside her hospital bed, the smell of disinfectant thick in the air, watching him cry quietly into his hands. It was the first time I'd ever seen my father look small. After the funeral, he hugged me tight and said, "You did good, son, real good. I'm proud of you." It felt honest. So when he asked if he could move closer to Seattle to start fresh, I agreed. I even helped him find a small apartment a few miles away. For a while, it felt like we were mending something broken. He'd visit on Sundays, bring over coffee, talk about business, ask about my contracts, my employees, my future plans. He'd say things like, "You've got your mother's brains, Ben. You're gonna go far." But somewhere along the line, the tone shifted. He started asking more how much I made, what my margins were, how I handled payroll. I thought it was fatherly curiosity. It wasn't tea. The first time I felt that something was wrong was a small thing. A missing checkbook. I had a business account checkbook I usually kept in my office drawer. One morning when I went to make a payment to a supplier, I couldn't find it. I searched the desk, the shelves, even under the printer. Nothing. I asked my assistant Tasha if she'd moved it. "No, sir," she said, frowning. "I didn't even know you kept checks here. You usually do everything online." She was right, I did. But I liked having a physical book just in case. That same evening, Dad dropped by unexpectedly. He was cheerful, almost too cheerful. He brought a bottle of whiskey and said we should celebrate life for once. We sat on the porch. The city lights shimmered in the distance, and the air had that sharp bite of late autumn. "You're really doing well, Ben," he said, sipping his drink. "I always knew you would." I smiled, feeling that old warmth again. "Thanks, Dad. It's been a long road." He nodded slowly. "You know, I was thinking, maybe I could help. Come on board, advise you, maybe take care of some investments. I've got experience after all." I hesitated. His tone was light, but there was something under it, a faint insistence, like he wasn't just offering, he was asking. "Dad," I said gently, "I appreciate that, but I've got everything running smoothly. I'm not really looking for partners right now." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Of course, just an idea." That night, after he left, I found the missing checkbook sitting neatly on my kitchen counter. It hadn't been there before. I wanted to believe it was nothing. I wanted to believe he'd just seen it and brought it back. But something about it didn't sit right. 2 weeks later, a supplier called asking about a check that had bounced, a check I'd never written. When I saw the signature on the scanned copy, my stomach dropped. It was my handwriting, or at least close enough to fool anyone who didn't know me. The payee? A private investment fund under my father's name. I confronted him the next morning. He was in his apartment, wearing that same blue robe I'd bought him last Christmas. The place smelled faintly of stale coffee and aftershave. "Dad," I said, holding up the printout, "what is this?" He barely looked at it. "What's it look like? A business investment? In my name?" I asked. My voice cracked. "With my checkbook?" He sighed and set his coffee down. "Ben, don't start. It was just a small thing. I was going to put it back once it paid off. You forged my signature." He stood, face hardening. "I borrowed, Ben. You wouldn't understand. You've never had to take risks like I did." I stared at him, this man who'd once taught me to tell the truth, to work hard, to never steal. "Dad," I said quietly, "you crossed a line." He smirked. "Don't lecture me, son. Everything you've built, it's because of what I taught you. You owe me that." "Owe him?" That was the moment something broke in me. A week later, my lawyer called. "Ben," she said carefully, "your father's filed a lawsuit. He's claiming your business was built using his capital from years ago, that you owe him half your assets." I remember sitting there, the phone pressed against my ear, my heart pounding so loud I could barely hear her next words. "Are you okay?" she asked. I wasn't. Because the man suing me was the same man who once lifted me on his shoulders and told me the world was mine. And now he wanted to take it all back. The days after that phone call felt like walking through a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I'd sit in my office pretending to review invoices or respond to emails, but my hands would just hover over the keyboard, motionless. The words on the screen would blur into nonsense. "Your father is suing you," that phrase kept looping in my head like an old vinyl stuck on a scratch. My lawyer, Amanda Reed, a steady woman with calm eyes and a low, patient voice, met with me the next morning. We sat across from each other in her office, the hum of the air conditioner the only sound between us. "Ben," she said carefully, "your father is claiming that he loaned you the startup capital to launch your company. He's produced what appears to be a written agreement and a series of checks from nearly 12 years ago." I blinked. "That's impossible. I never borrowed money from him. He refused to help me back then." Amanda slid a folder across the desk. Inside were photocopies of 3 checks, all made out to me, each signed by my father. The dates matched the year I'd started my company. Except the signatures weren't real. They were close, very close. But I recognized the difference, the loop on the R in his name, the shape of the H. He'd imitated his own handwriting to frame me as someone who owed him. I pushed the papers back across the desk. My voice came out quieter than I intended. He forged his own signature, to make it look like I borrowed from him. Amanda nodded slowly. "That's what it looks like. But proving forgery can be difficult, and he's hired a strong legal team. His attorney's arguing that you're refusing to honor your father's contributions." I let out a bitter laugh. "Contributions? He didn't give me a cent." She studied me carefully. "Ben, I know this is personal, but if this goes to court, everything will come out. Your financial records, your family history, every transaction you've ever made. Are you ready for that?" I wanted to say yes, but my throat tightened, because deep down I knew what she meant. Was I ready for the world to see the ugly truth about my father and about me? That night, I sat alone in my living room. The city outside my window buzzed with life, cars honking, laughter echoing from a nearby bar, but inside it was silent. Just the ticking of the clock on the wall, the same one Mom had given me when I first opened my business. I kept staring at an old photo on the bookshelf, me and Dad standing in front of his construction truck. I was maybe 10 years old, missing a front tooth, holding a wrench too big for my hands. He had one arm around my shoulder, the other pointing toward the truck like it was a symbol of legacy. "Someday you'll have your own, son," he'd said that day. "Something with your name on it." And I had. But now he wanted to take it not because he needed it, but because he couldn't stand that I'd built it without him. The news spread faster than I expected. People in the local business community started whispering. I could feel it when I walked into networking events, polite smiles, lingering glances. Some of my clients called to check in. Others hesitated to renew contracts. Family members I hadn't heard from in years suddenly had opinions. My Aunt Carol called one evening, her voice sharp over the line. "Ben, honey, what's going on? Your father says you're cutting him out after everything he's done for you." I sighed. "Aunt Carol, please. You know he didn't." "Ben, listen," she interrupted. "Your daddy's old. Maybe he just wants to feel included. You've got money now. Why not share a little? Family's family." I hung up before I said something I'd regret. Family's family. That phrase always sounds good until someone uses it to excuse betrayal. A week before the hearing, I met Dad in person for the first time since the lawsuit began. He showed up at my warehouse unannounced. The heavy sound of his boots echoed on the concrete floor. When I saw him, my chest tightened. "Dad," I said, my voice low, "you shouldn't be here." He looked around, eyes sweeping over the trucks, the shelves, the workers moving boxes in the distance. "You did good, Ben, real good." "Don't," I said sharply. "Don't act proud now. You're suing me." He tilted his head, half smiling. "It's business, son. Nothing personal." I stared at him, disbelief burning behind my ribs. "You forged documents. You forged checks." His face twitched just slightly. Then he said, "You think I don't know what, yo?" "You did, Ben. You used my old contacts. My name opened doors for you. Don't act like you built this all alone. I built this after you abandoned me," I shot back. "After you called me a fool for leaving Ohio." He took a step closer. "And look where it got you, sitting in an office thinking you're better than the man who gave you life." The warehouse lights flickered overhead, and for a moment I saw the same rage in his eyes that I remembered from my childhood, the kind that turned rooms cold and quiet. I didn't speak. He smirked, brushing invisible dust from his sleeve. "You could end this easily, Ben. Just sign over 40% of the company to me. We'll call it even." I laughed, but it sounded hollow. "Even." He leaned closer. His voice dropped to a whisper. "You'll see, son. The court doesn't care about your feelings. Paperwork speaks louder than memory." Then he turned and walked out, leaving the scent of his aftershave in a pit in my stomach that felt like grief. That night, I couldn't sleep. My thoughts spiraled. I kept thinking about Mom, how she'd always been the peacekeeper between us. She'd be heartbroken if she saw this. At 2 a.m., I got up, made coffee, and spread out every document I'd ever filed since starting the business contracts. Invoices, bank statements, tax filings. I needed proof, something undeniable. And that's when I noticed something small but strange. One of the so-called loan checks from Dad's evidence file was dated 2 weeks before I'd even registered the company. Another bore a signature that used his new handwriting style, the one he started after Mom died. He'd slipped up. I took photos of everything, documented every inconsistency, and sent them to Amanda the next morning. By the end of that week, we had a forensic handwriting expert on board, and their preliminary report was clear. The checks were created recently, not 12 years ago. The ink composition, paper fibers, and microprinting didn't match the supposed era. When Amanda told me, I exhaled for what felt like the first time in weeks. "You've got him, Ben," she said, "but be prepared, this will get ugly in court." And she was right. The courtroom was packed the day of the hearing. I wore a plain gray suit, the kind that didn't draw attention. My father sat across from me wearing his best blazer, chin high, eyes cold. When his attorney spoke, it was all polished words and feigned righteousness. "Mr. Hayes merely seeks fair compensation for the business he helped his son establish. This is not greed. This is justice." I sat quietly, hands folded, as they painted me like an ungrateful son. When it was my turn to speak, the judge asked gently, "Mr. Hayes, do you have anything to say before we review the evidence?" I stood, heart pounding. I didn't look at the judge. I looked at my father. "Yes, Your Honor," I said. "I do." The moment I stood, time felt like it stretched. Every eye in the courtroom turned to me, reporters, attorneys, strangers. Even the court clerk paused mid-note. The only sound was the faint buzz of the fluorescent lights above us. I looked at my father. His jaw was tight, his fingers drumming lightly on the table as if he were bored. He wouldn't meet my eyes. I cleared my throat and began, my voice steady. "Your Honor, my father claims he loaned me the capital to start my company. He says I owe him half of what I've built. But what he's really asking for is something far greater than money. He's asking for credit for a life he didn't live." A murmur rippled through the room. My father did not loan me a cent. 12 years ago, when I came to him for help, desperate, jobless, with nothing but an idea, he told me, and I quote, "You're on your own. If you fail, don't come crying back." Across the aisle, my father stiffened, his lawyer whispering urgently to him. "I started from zero," I continued. "I drove freight trucks at night, slept in parking lots, and saved every dollar I could. I registered my business with what I had $327 and a broken laptop." I paused, the words heavy. I didn't have his help, but now that I've built something worth taking, suddenly he remembers being my investor. The judge raised an eyebrow but gestured for me to continue. "My father's evidence is based on 3 checks, supposedly written over a decade ago." "But those checks," I said, sliding the folder toward the clerk, "are modern forgeries. The ink and paper didn't exist in that form 12 years ago. And his own signature, the one he changed after my mother passed, appears on all 3. The clerk handed the documents to the judge. The room went still. I turned my gaze back to my father. His face had paled slightly, his eyes darting toward the evidence like he wanted to grab it back. "Your Honor," I said, softer now, "this isn't just about business. This is about betrayal. I grew up idolizing my father. I watched him work, fail, and rise again. I wanted to be like him, honest, tough, respected. But somewhere along the way he started seeing me not as his son, but as his competition." A long silence hung in the air. You could almost hear people breathing. "He's not here today because he needs help. He's here because he can't stand that I made it without him. He wants to rewrite our history to make himself the hero." I took a breath and stepped back. "That's all I have to say." Then I sat down. For a moment, even the judge didn't move. He looked at the documents again, then turned to my father. "Mr. Hayes Sr., do you have a response?" Dad's lawyer leaned close to whisper something, but my father lifted his hand sharply, silencing him. He stood, adjusting his jacket, and spoke with a forced calm. "My son's lying," he said, his voice strained but loud. "Those checks are real. I helped him. Maybe I didn't write every date down right, but the money came from me. He wouldn't be where he is without me." He turned toward me, his eyes burning. "You think you did this all on your own? Every skill you used I taught you, every lesson, every work ethic mine. You owe me that, Ben." "Mr. Hayes," the judge said firmly, "please address the court." But he wasn't listening. "You ungrateful boy," my father hissed. "You turned your back on me, on your family, and now you're trying to make me look like a thief?" I met his gaze for the first time without fear. "No, Dad," I said quietly. "You did that yourself." The judge called for a short recess. People shuffled out, whispering. I sat there, staring at the empty witness stand. My hands trembled slightly under the table, the adrenaline finally catching up. Amanda leaned over. "You did great," she whispered. "That was powerful." "Does it matter?" I asked quietly. "He'll never see it that way." She sighed. "Maybe not. But the truth has a way of echoing louder than lies." During the recess, I found myself standing in the hallway outside the courtroom. The walls were lined with photos of judges from years past, all stern faces, all staring straight ahead. I was staring at the floor when I heard footsteps. Ben. It was him. My father walked up slowly, his expression unreadable. For the first time since the lawsuit started, he looked tired. The deep lines on his face seemed heavier, his shoulders slightly slumped. "You think you won in there?" he said, voice low. "I didn't win anything," I replied. "This isn't a victory, Dad, it's a funeral," he frowned. "A funeral? For what's left of us?" He laughed bitterly. "You've always been dramatic." I turned to him. "You stole from me, lied about me, tried to destroy the only thing I built. What else am I supposed to call that?" He looked away, jaw tightening. "You wouldn't understand. You don't know what it's like to give your life to something and watch it all slip away." I had nothing left, Ben. Not the business, not your mother, not you. I needed something. Something? I echoed. You needed me. But instead of asking for help, you tried to take it by force. He aimed his mouth, then shut it again. His eyes flicked to the floor. For a moment I thought I saw a flicker of shame. Then he muttered, "You think you're better than me?" "No," I said quietly, "just different." He shook his head and walked away. When court resumed, the mood had shifted. The forensic analysts presented their findings detailed, scientific, undeniable. The forged checks, the mismatched paper stock, the inconsistent signatures. The opposing attorney tried to recover, but it was futile. The evidence spoke for itself. The judge's expression hardened as he turned to my father. "Mr. Hayes, given the evidence presented, it appears the financial documents were fabricated. Filing falsified claims is a serious offense. Do you wish to continue with this lawsuit?" For the first time, my father didn't have an answer. He just sat there, eyes fixed on the table, lips pressed in a thin line. His lawyer whispered something, but he didn't respond. "Mr. Hayes?" the judge repeated. My father finally spoke, voice barely audible. "No, Your Honor, I withdraw the claim." A hush fell over the room. The judge nodded. "Very well. Case dismissed." He banged the gavel, and that was it. Years of pain, humiliation, and love turned to dust in 3 short words: case dismissed. As I walked out of the courtroom, the reporters swarmed near the entrance, their questions overlapping. "Mr. Hayes, how do you feel? What happens now? Do you plan to reconcile?" I didn't answer any of them. Outside, the Seattle air was cool and damp. The sky was pale gray, the kind that promises rain but doesn't deliver. I looked across the street and saw my father standing there alone. He looked smaller somehow, not the towering man who once seemed invincible, but just a man, old and tired, holding the weight of his own choices. For a second, our eyes met. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but then he didn't. He just turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. I stood there for a long time, feeling nothing but the ache of what used to be. That night, I went home and sat by the window with a cup of coffee. The city lights flickered in the distance, the same way they always had. But everything felt quieter. When my phone buzzed, I half expected it to be him. But it wasn't. It was a text from Aunt Carol. He dropped the case. "I hope you can forgive him someday, Ben. He's still your father." I stared at the message for a long time before typing back. "Maybe someday, but not today." News travels fast, faster than you want it to, when your family becomes a headline. Within a day, my inbox was full. Some messages were kind, others not so much. A few called me brave for standing up for myself, but many just pitied me, because no matter how right you are, when the world hears you took your father to court, they don't see justice. They see a broken family. By the weekend, it had spread through every business circle I knew. Clients, partners, even employees whispered. The words lawsuit and father hung in the air like bad perfume. I tried to focus on work, to move forward, but the tension in the office was thick. Tasha, my assistant, poked her head into my office one morning. "You doing okay, boss?" she asked gently. I looked up from my desk, forcing a smile. "I'm fine, just a lot on my mind." She hesitated, then said, "I saw the article online, the one about your dad." I sighed. "Of course you did. Everyone did." She stepped closer. "For what it's worth, I think you did the right thing. Most people wouldn't have had the guts to fight back, not against family." Her words caught me off guard. "Thanks, Tasha." She smiled softly. "You've always treated everyone here like family, Ben. Maybe that's why it hurts so much, because you know what that word's supposed to mean." When she left, I stared at her words written in my mind like chalk on a board. What that word's supposed to mean. That evening, I drove to the waterfront, a quiet stretch of pier my mother used to love. She'd take me there when I was a kid, sitting on the edge with her feet dangling over the water, eating ice cream even when it was cold out. She'd say, "Ben, remember, this money can build a house, but only love can make it home." If she were alive now, I didn't know if she'd be proud of me or heartbroken. As I sat there, a drizzle began to fall, misting the air. The smell of salt and rain mixed with something old and aching in my chest. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. "Figured I'd find you here." It was my cousin, Eric, one of the few family members who'd stood by me through it all. He handed me a coffee and sat beside me, silent for a while. Finally, he said, "You know, your dad called me this morning." I looked over sharply. "What did he say?" He took a sip, said he made a mistake, said he didn't mean for it to go that far. I scoffed. Funny, he had plenty of chances to stop. I know, Eric said quietly, but he's embarrassed, ashamed even. He's been hiding out at home, doesn't talk to anyone. Good, I muttered before I could stop myself. Eric just looked at me, not judging, not pitying, just looking. You're allowed to be angry, Ben, but don't let that anger build a wall you can't tear down later. I shook my head. You sound like my mother. He smiled faintly. V, he said. Ben, do you think one day you could come by for dinner? No lawyers, no yelling, just father and son. I paused at the door. Maybe someday. He smiled faintly. That's better than never. Over the next few months, I kept my distance, but I also didn't shut him out completely. Small things, a phone call on his birthday, a text on Christmas, small cautious steps. People around town eventually stopped talking about the lawsuit. My business grew again, and while the wounds between me and my father never fully closed, they became scars, reminders, not open cuts. Sometimes I'd still find myself at that pier, watching the waves roll in. The hurt would rise, but so would something softer, understanding, maybe even forgiveness in slow motion, because at some point you realize the truth. Some people break you because they're already broken themselves. I used to think winning meant standing alone, but that day in court taught me something else. Sometimes the real victory is in letting go. After the judgment, the house felt still, the kind of quiet that presses on your chest. The afternoon sun slipped through the curtains, laying those long gold stripes across the floor, and I remember sitting there, hands clasped, eyes on nothing, just breathing. For years, I'd carried the image of my father as a giant I could never please. That giant had shrunk in front of a judge, and somehow that didn't make me proud, it made me sad. Mom called that night. Her voice was soft, like she'd been crying. Ben, he's not taking it well, she said. I rubbed my forehead. I didn't mean to humiliate him, Mom. I just couldn't let him take what I've built. I know, she said, but he's still your father. That line hung in the air long after she hung up. I started seeing small reminders of him everywhere. The cracked leather wallet he gave me when I graduated. The old hammer he'd used to build the treehouse when I was 8. It was like the universe was nudging me, showing me the man behind the mistake. A week later, I drove across town to his place. The porch light was off, though it was only dusk. I stood there, keys in my hand, wondering if I should even knock. Then I saw the faint glow from the living room window, just enough to outline him sitting there, alone, staring at the floor. I took a breath and went in. The door creaked like it used to. He didn't look up at first. Dad, I said quietly. His eyes lifted, slow, tired. The man who once towered over me looked smaller somehow. You shouldn't be here, he muttered. I know, I said, stepping closer, but I came anyway, he scoffed. You won. You got what you wanted. No, I whispered. I didn't want to win against you. I just wanted you to see me. He blinked. That was the first crack. See you? He repeated. Yeah, not as a kid you could order around, as a man, as your son who still wants his father. He leaned back, and for the first time in years his voice broke. I didn't mean for it to go this far, Ben. I thought you owed me for everything I gave up. I didn't know how to ask for love, so I asked for money. I felt my throat tighten. All those years of silence, of unspoken hurt, poured out between us without another word. I sat down across from him. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the clock ticking on the wall, the same one Mom used to wind after dinner. Finally, I said, You don't owe me an apology, Dad. You just have to try. Maybe that's all either of us can do. He nodded, eyes wet, jaw trembling. Then he whispered, I'm proud of you, son. That was the moment. The one I'd waited half my life for. It didn't come with fireworks or grand music. It came quietly, like a gentle breeze through a cracked window. But it was enough. The weeks that followed felt lighter. I helped him fix up the house. He started showing up at my place for dinner on Sundays, bringing those awkward store-bought pies like he used to when Mom made him apologize. The furs. Few dinners were stiff, every word careful, like we were afraid to break something fragile. But slowly, laughter crept back in. One night he told me about the time he almost lost the house when I was in college. I didn't want you to know, he said, but I was terrified back then. I thought being strong meant pretending I wasn't scared. I smiled. I used to think the same thing. He looked at me across the table, and for once, there was no pride, no judgment, just understanding. Months later, we went back to court, not as enemies, but to settle a small technicality about the trust fund. The same judge looked at us over her glasses, clearly surprised to see us sitting side by side. Before she could speak, Dad cleared his throat and said, "Your Honor, I'd like to withdraw all my claims. My son and I have worked things out." Her eyebrows lifted. "I'm glad to hear that, Mr. Henderson." Dad smiled faintly. "So am I." Outside the courthouse, he turned to me and said, "I don't deserve your forgiveness." I shook my head. "It's not about deserving, Dad. It's about starting over." He nodded, eyes glistening, and for the first time we walked out together, not one behind the other, but side by side. Life didn't turn perfect after that. We still had our silences, our stubborn moments, but the air between us had changed. There was respect now, and something softer, maybe even love. Mom said once, "You both learned that pride is the loneliest room in the house." She was right. Pride builds walls, but forgiveness opens windows. A year later, when Dad had his heart surgery, I sat by his bedside the whole night. He woke up groggy and whispered, "You still here?" "Yeah," I said, smiling. "Where else would I be?" He chuckled weakly. "Guess I did something right after all." I squeezed his hand. "You did, Dad. You really did." When I think back to that courtroom now, I don't see the anger or the shouting. I see a man who was lost in his own hurt, and a son who finally learned that strength isn't in winning, it's in forgiving. I kept the old hammer he used for that treehouse. It's rusty now, the handle cracked, but it sits on my desk as a reminder. Love can break, but it can also be rebuilt with patience, with grace, and with time. Forgiveness isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a quiet decision you make in the middle of an empty kitchen, staring at a cup of cold coffee, realizing that holding on to anger only keeps you chained. That's what I learned from my father. He wasn't a perfect man, far from it. He carried his pride like armor, and for years I mistook that for cruelty. But underneath, there was a boy who'd never learned how to say "I'm sorry," and a man who didn't know how to love without control. The courtroom didn't fix us. The judge didn't heal us, but time, humility, and a single honest conversation did what years of silence couldn't. Now, when I visit him, he always has that same old record playing, the one Mom used to hum while she cooked dinner. He hums along, off-key, and every time I hear it, I realize how much peace can grow once you stop needing the past to apologize perfectly. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd walked away that night instead of knocking on his door. Maybe we'd both still be carrying that bitterness, pretending we didn't care. Maybe he'd still think I hated him. Maybe I'd still be telling people I'd moved on when really I was just stuck in pride. Forgiveness doesn't make what happened right. It doesn't erase the hurt, but it frees you. It gives you the space to see someone's brokenness without letting it break you. And maybe that's the real inheritance my father left me, not money, not property, not even approval. But the understanding that love isn't about winning. It's about staying, even when it's hard. It's about reaching out one more time, even when your pride tells you not to. I used to think I'd never be like him. Now I hope someday I'll be half the man he became in O's final years, humble, present, grateful. Because when all the shouting fades, when the papers are signed and the wounds start to close, all that's left is the truth. We're all just trying to be seen, to be forgiven, and to love in the best way we know how. So if you're listening right now, and there's someone in your life you haven't spoken to because of something they did or something you said, maybe this is your sign to pick up the phone. Not because they deserve it, but because you do. You deserve peace. And who knows? Maybe the person you're afraid to forgive is just waiting, like my father was, for someone brave enough to say, "I still care." Would you have done what I did? Would you have walked back to that house? Or would you have let the silence win? Tell me what your heart says. I'd love to hear your story in the comments below, and if this story touched something in you today, don't forget to subscribe, because sometimes the stories that hurt the most are the ones that heal us best. This was my story. Thank you for listening.